200,000 years ago. East Africa. Late dry season. Before dawn. The group is awake earlier than it should be. No one says that aloud because there is no word yet for should in the fully abstract sense. No formal grammar for obligation. No philosophy of proper timing. But everybody here knows it. The air is still cold from night. The horizon has not yet broken. The children should still be sleeping. The hunters should still be saving heat. The women who spent yesterday digging roots and carrying water should still be curled under hides beside the embers. And yet the camp is awake, because the water is going bad. The spring below the basalt ridge has not failed entirely. That would be simpler. A dry spring is a clear fact. One comes to the place where water should be, finds only cracked mud or black insects moving inside a shrinking stain, and the body understands at once what must happen next. But this is worse. There is water, yes. There is always enough to keep hope alive a little longer. Enough for one more day, perhaps two. Enough to seduce the group into staying. Enough to make leaving feel premature, almost foolish. And that is how small groups die. Not because they do not see danger, because they see it too late, or half see it, or see it and cannot agree on what it means. A leopard is simple. A flash of movement in grass, a smell, a certain silence among birds, and the body chooses before thought arrives. Run, climb, freeze, throw. But a failing spring is not like that. A failing spring is a pattern. It is memory. It is comparison. It is noticing that the waterline is lower than it was 4 mornings ago, that the mud around it has been trampled by too many hooves, that the baboons came earlier yesterday than usual, that a dead antelope was found downstream, and the flies had reached the eyes before noon. To read such danger, one needs more than strength. One needs someone who can hold several days in the mind at once. That is where leadership begins. Not with a crown, not with a throne, not with commands barked through language fully formed. With one human being looking at the same world as everyone else and seeing more of its pattern. Sooner, and with enough force of presence that others move when he moves, or when she does. There are 17 in the group, a small number by the standards of later villages, empires, armies, states, but by the standards of most of human history, a complete world. 3 children not yet able to travel a full day on their own. 2 adolescents, on the edge of adult work, but not yet trusted with the hardest decisions. 7 adults in their strongest years. 3 older adults whose bodies are slower, but whose eyes have seen more dry seasons than the others. 1 infant. 1 woman carrying another child not yet born. 17 mouths. 17 bodies losing water every hour without knowing the mathematics of loss. 17 lives tied to one decision. Stay or leave. No formal vote will happen. No raised hands, no speech about options. But the decision still has to occur. And for it to occur, one person must become more than merely one among many. One person must gather uncertainty into direction. He is not the biggest male in the group. That matters. If leadership had begun simply with size, it would not be especially interesting. Many mammals have size hierarchies. Gorillas do. Baboons do. Wolves have dominant structures. Stags fight. Elephant bulls displace one another. In such systems, the body itself settles many disputes. Larger, stronger, more aggressive often means higher rank, at least for a time. But humans became dangerous to the planet precisely because they did not remain organized only by that old logic. The man standing near the ash is perhaps 35 years old. Not elderly, but no longer at the reckless peak of youth. A scar runs from the right side of the jaw down into the neck. Old, pale, slightly twisted where tissue healed badly. 1 finger on the left hand, never fully straightened after a break years ago. The legs are strong, but not the strongest. A younger hunter, broad-shouldered and impatient, could probably beat him in a pure contest of force. Yet when this man rises, others watch without appearing to watch. That is another beginning of leadership. Attention given before speech. A field around one body in which the others, almost involuntarily, begin orienting. He does not own anything in the later sense. There is no office, no inherited title, no symbol carved to mark him as separate. His authority exists only in other nervous systems. It is stored in memory. Last dry season he found a seat below stone when everyone else thought the area finished. 2 rains ago, he stopped a fight before one man put a sharpened point into another's chest over marrow distribution. Once, years earlier, when a child wandered beyond sight at dusk, he found the child by reading broken stems and the agitation of birds, long after the others had turned their fear into noise. These things accumulate. Reputation is memory distributed through a group. That is the material leadership is first made of. Not law, not divine sanction. Remembered competence, remembered restraint, remembered usefulness under pressure. Humans are exquisitely sensitive to this. We often pretend, in modern systems, that legitimacy belongs only to formal office, written rule, or force backed by institutions. But beneath all of that, older circuits still run. Who stayed calm when others panicked? Who knew the route? Who shared food in scarcity? Who predicted correctly? Who did not waste lives for vanity? Who can be trusted when the world becomes uncertain? Those questions are Paleolithic. Those questions built the first leaders long before they built states. The man kneels beside the embers and touches the ash, still warm below the pale surface. He looks toward the east, then toward the ridge, then toward the sleeping place where the oldest woman is already sitting upright, watching him. There is no dialogue in the modern sense. No exchange of opinions fully verbalized. But there is assessment. She knows what he is thinking before he signals anything at all, because leadership in small groups is rarely solitary. It is a node, not a peak. The visible front of leadership often rests on invisible support from memory holders, kinship stabilizers, women whose social knowledge is deeper than their physical speed, elders who remember where the dead lie and where water lasted in the dry year when they were young. The first leader was probably never alone. Even when one body stood at the center, authority was braided from many hands. That matters because later myths lie to us. They like singular founders, first kings, heroic patriarchs, decisive conquerors, one face attached to one beginning. Reality, especially early reality, is less theatrical and more biological. Human groups survived through distributed intelligence. The first chief, if we insist on the word chief, would not have been a miniature emperor in skins. He would have been a coordinator of many perceptions, a focal point through which scattered concerns became one movement. He rises and walks toward the spring without hurrying. 3 others follow, not because they were ordered to, but because following has already become the shape of their trust. This is one of the most important thresholds in human evolution. When others begin moving because you move, not from panic but from expectation that your movement means something, hierarchy has changed form. It is no longer merely the hierarchy of teeth and muscle. It is the hierarchy of anticipated judgment. The spring lies in a shallow depression where stone breaks the slope and underground water sometimes reaches the surface. Sometimes. That word is everything. The world of early humans was not made primarily of constants. It was made of unreliable patterns. Fruiting trees varied, herds shifted, rains delayed, rivers changed course. Predators appeared where they were not last season. Illness passed through for reasons no one could explain. Children survived or did not. Women bled and gave birth and sometimes died. Men left and did not return. In such a world, the body strong enough to run and throw mattered. But the mind able to read unstable patterns mattered more and more with every generation. He crouches beside the water. The others remain just far enough back that they can see his posture. Posture communicates long before abstract speech. A body leaning loosely means safety or uncertainty, still unresolved. A body gone still in a certain way means danger recognized. A head tilted, nostrils widened, hand touching mud and then lifting, fingers rubbed together. These are readings. The younger hunter shifts weight, impatient. He wants action, any action, because youth often prefers danger with movement to danger with deliberation. The older woman behind them does not move at all. Her stillness is a different kind of knowledge, the knowledge that wrong speed kills. He looks at the edges first. not the center. Again, this matters. Inexperienced eyes go to the obvious thing, the visible water. Experienced eyes go to the margins. Hoofprints layered over one another. The softness of the mud ring, the color of the algae, the smell of rot, the insect density, the angle at which the morning's first animals approached. Leadership begins in peripheral vision, in noticing what others ignore, because they are staring at the main fact. The spring is not only lower, it is fouler, not poison in some dramatic sense. Just increased risk. More animals have come through. Too many species: antelope, zebra, hyena, smaller carnivores. Perhaps even another human group at dusk yesterday. There is a print near the northern side that is wrong in proportion for anyone sleeping now in the camp. This means the place is becoming not only weak, but crowded, and crowding around water is one of the oldest invitations to violence. A camp dies from thirst, or from the fight that thirst produces. He sees both at once. This ability to see the secondary danger hidden inside the primary one is a core feature of leadership. The first leader is not merely the one who identifies the problem. Others can do that. The first leader is the one who sees what the problem will become if it is left to ripen. Modern societies still reward this, though inconsistently. A competent pilot senses not merely weather, but how weather plus fatigue plus schedule pressure becomes catastrophe. A good physician sees not only infection, but the cascade of complications if treatment is delayed. A military officer worth following sees not just terrain, but morale, supply, timing, panic, and friendly fire. These are elaborations of a much older human skill, perceiving consequences before the group is trapped inside them. He smells the water and spits, not theatrically, only once. The gesture is enough. The younger hunter swears under his breath, in a language too early to call by name, but with the same sound pattern of frustration that men thousands of generations later will make in factories, trenches, kitchens, boardrooms, prisons, and hospitals when the thing they hoped might still hold has finally failed. He stands and points west, a low gesture, almost horizontal. Not north, where hills rise, but the land is dry longer into the year. Not south, where there is game but also other groups. West. This is not arbitrary. 3 days walk west, if the children hold, and if the pregnant woman does not begin bleeding, there should be trees in a fold of land where moisture remains later than it does here. Should be. Again, the world gives only probabilities. But he was there 2 wet seasons ago. He remembers the line of dark stone, the sound of frogs after dusk, the bitter tubers near the roots, the old carcass of an elephant weathered white under thorn. He does not remember this as scenery. He remembers it as survival architecture. Human memory changed when it became geographic in this dense way, not merely remembering where things are, remembering where they are in relation to need, season, risk, and social history. The first leader carries a map no one can see, and others follow because fragments of their own memories confirm enough of his. Leadership is rarely hypnotic in small groups. It is convergent. Enough people remember enough of the same truth that one person's direction hardens into collective movement. He returns to camp and begins with the fire. Not the water. The fire. Because the camp must be translated from stillness into motion in the right order, or fear will scatter it. This, too, is leadership. Not only knowing what to do, but knowing in what sequence actions must happen to keep a group from consuming itself through confusion. First, embers are gathered and banked so the fire can be carried. Fire is not just heat now. It is continuity. A moving group without fire must risk making new fire under uncertain conditions, and that risk is not trivial. So the old woman and one adolescent prepare a bark container lined with damp earth. Another woman folds hides. The broad, impatient hunter is given the job of cutting carrying branches, a task beneath his vanity just enough to irritate him and useful enough to occupy his body before irritation turns into challenge. This is another ancient skill of leadership. Give restless strength a task before it turns against the group. Dominant systems in other animals often solve tension directly, through display, strike, flight. Human leadership increasingly solved it, through role assignment. You are not merely stronger than I am or weaker than I am. You are for this. She is for that. The child stays here. The elder carries memory. The impatient one lifts weight. The calm one keeps the infant quiet. Authority here is not brute command, but distribution of bodies into necessary function. That is more complex than dominance. It requires theory of mind. You must understand not only what needs doing, but what each other person is likely to do if idle, frightened, hungry, proud, resentful, grieving. The first leader is part logistician, part psychologist, part weather reader, part memory bank, part actor, managing tension inside a living machine made of kin and rivals. And because the machine is small, every part is personal. The younger hunter looks at him too long after being given work. There it is. The oldest political fact. Resentment toward the one whose judgment organizes others. No leadership appears without this shadow. Even if authority arises from competence, it creates asymmetry. One body becomes more central than another. One memory counts more in the crucial moment. One gesture moves many bodies. To the insecure, the reckless, or the simply ambitious, this is intolerable. The first chief was born at exactly the same moment as the first rival. Power and resentment enter human life together. The younger man obeys, but not cleanly. He cuts branches hard, loudly, with waist motion. Everyone notices. No one comments. Small groups do not need public analysis of status tension. They smell it the way animals smell rain. The leader notices too and lets it pass. Not weakness, selection. If he humiliates the younger man now, in front of the others, he may win the instant and poison the march. If he ignores it entirely forever, he may invite challenge later under worse conditions. Leadership is not simply the enforcement of submission. It is the management of when not to enforce, and why. This is why the first leader could not be only the fiercest fighter. Fighters often understand collision. Leaders must understand timing. By full dawn, the camp is no longer a camp. It is a line of loaded bodies. That transformation alone is a small miracle of human coordination. A place where children slept, where marrow was cracked, where dung flies gathered, where scraps of hide lay under stone, where ash marked old fires and one woman bled in the night and another soothed a fever, becomes, within less than an hour, movement. The world early humans inhabited was unstable enough that this ability to become portable on short notice may have saved more lineages than any single weapon. Portability is intelligence made social. Not everyone understands why they are leaving. Not fully. The children only know that adults move faster and speak in a tighter way. The adolescent girl knows enough to fear, but not enough to compare the present to other dry seasons. The old man who limps with a hip that never healed right knows perfectly well the cost of movement and does not hide his disgust at it. The pregnant woman knows the cost in her body more intimately than anyone else. Every additional mile is strain, risk, water loss, and a possible edge into bleeding that could kill both her and what she carries. To move such a group requires more than issuing direction. It requires maintaining trust among bodies paying unequal costs. This is another place leadership emerges. The burden of persuading others whose suffering will be greater than yours. He cannot actually promise safety. No leader could. That is one of the oldest and most persistent lies about power. That power means control over outcomes. It does not. It means responsibility for choice under uncertainty. The first leader knows this in the body, even if he cannot articulate it abstractly. West may fail. The remembered water may be gone. Another group may already hold the fold of land. A child may collapse by noon. Hyenas may shadow them at dusk. But staying is worse. He believes this. Belief here is not ideology. It is weighted judgment. He walks near the middle, not the front. Again, that matters. A pure dominance male might insist on the visible lead, the high status point of the moving line. But a coordinator who understands vulnerability chooses differently. From the middle, he can hear the weak, watch the rear, send the strongest ahead when needed, and keep the broad field of the group in his peripheral awareness. He is not performing command. He is preserving the organism. The first chief is often nearest to the system's point of fragility. That is a different model of power than later states will celebrate, but it may be the older one. The route rises first through thorn and broken basalt. Foot placement matters. Children are lifted at the worst ledges. The younger hunter, still stung by assignment, carries 2 bundles without being asked, partly from strength, partly from the need to prove his strength. This, too, the leader allows. Let pride serve load-bearing rather than conflict. An old truth. Once they gain the ridge, the land opens. The dry season has peeled color back to essentials. Gray grass, yellow dust, black rock, sky already whitening toward heat. A vulture circles far south. The line of acacias below throws thin shadows like fingers. In the distance, where the land falls westward, there is the faint darkening that may be trees. Or maybe only shadow. Hope is dangerous in such landscapes. Too much, and the group outruns its reserves. Too little, and it stops moving before it must. A leader modulates hope, not by speaking of destiny, by controlling pace. Too fast, and the children break. Too slow, and the sun punishes everyone by afternoon. Humans often imagine leadership as decision in the dramatic moment. Choose left or right, stay or go, fight or negotiate. But most leadership, especially early leadership, is metabolic. It is pacing. It is rest timing. It is when to push and when to stop. It is who drinks first, who waits, how much is carried, where shade is taken, when risk is accepted. The group survives or dies through dozens of such tiny calibrations, more often than through one theatrical act. By mid-morning, the infant begins crying with the hot, thin cry that means thirst more than fear. The mother tries to nurse, but milk under dehydration is a cruel negotiation. The child latches, sucks, finds less than expected, grows angrier. The sound phrase, everyone's nerves. Here's another political fact older than politics. The distress of the vulnerable destabilizes the whole group if no one can answer it. He calls a halt under bad shade. Not enough, but something. This will cost distance. Yet he chooses it because groups are not made of miles alone. A line that keeps moving while one mother slips toward panic may gain ground and lose coherence. He knows this, or rather his nervous system and remembered experience know it for him. Leadership at this stage is rarely conscious in the literary sense. It is practiced pattern recognition embodied. The old woman chews bitter root and spits the moist mash into the infant's mouth in tiny amounts. Another woman rearranges the load on the pregnant carrier. The adolescent boy is sent to climb a nearby outcrop and scan the west. The younger hunter wants to do it. He is denied with a flick of the hand. Again, small status management. Give vantage to the watchful, not the volatile. Authority is also the art of choosing who gets to see first. The boy returns with uncertain news. Trees, maybe. Light flashing below, maybe water. Hard to tell. The group breathes in a collective way that has no name yet, but will be familiar forever. The body widening around possibility and narrowing around the fear of false possibility. He does not let them rush. That restraint may be the most difficult form of leadership to produce and to follow. Everyone wants the relief of action synchronized to hope. But the world kills the hopeful in great numbers when hope outruns verification. He sends 2 fast adults ahead, one male, one female, both known for quiet feet and good judgment rather than pure speed. Not a heroic charge, a reconnaissance. This is another threshold. Delegated authority. The first leader cannot do everything himself. The moment the group becomes complex enough, leadership begins reproducing itself in lesser decisions carried by trusted others. In that moment, hierarchy acquires layers. Not class, not bureaucracy, but structure. She goes. He goes. They return. Their report shapes movement. All later command systems are distant descendants of this simple act. Trust 2 others with the truth before the whole group risks itself. While they are gone, tension returns to the younger hunter's body like fever. He mutters that they waste sun. The leader does not answer. Silence is also authority when used correctly. To answer every challenge dignifies every challenge. But silence must be timed. Too much silence becomes weakness. Too little becomes defensive instability. He lets the words fall into air because everyone heard them, And everyone also heard that no one moved. The group itself, not only the central figure, now sustains his authority. That is when leadership becomes real. When it no longer depends on the leader's body alone. When others enforce it by expectation. This is the first institution, if one dares use the word so early. An invisible agreement about whose judgment counts when counting must happen quickly. When the scouts return, dusty and breathing hard, the answer comes not in grammar but in urgency. Water. Not plenty, enough. Trees. No immediate sign of another group. The whole line changes shape with the news. Shoulders lift, children stand quicker. Even the old man's limp shortens for several steps. This is why successful prediction magnifies power. It does not merely solve one problem. It enters memory as proof. The leader judged correctly. The body westward now becomes not only a man, but a bearer of validated pattern. The first chief is made from remembered accuracy under stress. And each accurate survival deepens the groove. By the time they reach the trees, the day has become merciless. The fold of land is not paradise. Early humans almost never found paradise. What they found were gradients of less bad. A narrow line of shade. Mud thick enough to dig into for seep water. Sour figs high in branches. Tracks old but not fresh. Birdsong. That is enough. Enough for the body to unclench slightly. Enough for the infant to quiet after 3 finger widths of muddy water filtered through hide. Enough for the pregnant woman not to collapse. Enough for the broad young hunter to look at the leader and not look away quickly enough to hide what has just happened inside him. He has been proven wrong. This matters nearly as much as the water. Because groups do not only need resources, they need resolution of uncertainty into legitimacy. The younger man could have become a rival under the dry ridge. Here, with the westward choice validated, rivalry does not vanish, but it is delayed. Power has bought time. Many leaders in every era survive first by buying time. Rarely forever. But time is often enough for structure to deepen. The camp forms again, though more loosely because everyone is exhausted. The old woman directs where sleeping hides should go, without asking permission from anyone, including him. This too is leadership, but of another kind. Domain leadership, authority nested inside competence. She knows fire carrying, child fever, plant bitterness, memory of births. The smell of bad meat before rot is visible. No one contests her there. He does not need to. He gains by not contesting her. A leader who tries to occupy every domain shrinks his own legitimacy. The first chief who survived likely understood, in body if not in abstract principle, that shared authority is not lost when the group is small, and memory is precious. This matters for another reason. The first leaders may often have been male in some contexts, because mobility, hunting visibility, and intergroup defense rewarded certain male behaviors. But the first durable authority in human groups was almost certainly mixed. Women controlled food knowledge invisible to hunters. Elders controlled memory. Midlife hunters controlled risk. Skilled makers controlled tools. Socially gifted individuals controlled reconciliation. Children themselves, through their vulnerability, controlled pace. Leadership was never a single thing, even when one person stood at the center of crisis. If we ignore that, we mistake the origins of power for a caricature. Even now, later systems still rest on this buried truth. The visible leader is only as real as the distributed competences beneath him. He drinks last. Not theatrically, no one applauds, no one composes a myth in the moment. But everyone notices. This act appears in many later leadership traditions because it has deep biological logic. In scarcity, the order of access reveals structure. If the central figure seizes first and fullest in every crisis, legitimacy thins unless fear alone holds the group together. But if the central figure delays gratification visibly enough that others register it, power transforms from predation into stewardship. The first chief was probably measured less by how much he could take than by how much he could postpone taking without losing control. This is not morality in the later sermon sense. It is social engineering in a species that remembers. A child sleeps, Another begins playing with mud because even near-death exhaustion children restore normality obscenely fast. Adults half smile, half resent this, life insisting on itself. The younger hunter cleans his point with unnecessary violence. The old man sleeps sitting up, mouth open. The pregnant woman does not sleep at all. She sits with one hand under her belly and studies the leader through lowered eyes. Why? Because leadership decisions are registered most deeply by those who pay their cost in flesh. He chose west. Her body walked west. He was right today. What about tomorrow? This is one of the most ancient forms of political evaluation, and one of the most honest. Not rhetoric, not charisma alone. What did your decision do to my body, to my child, to the burden I carry, to the distance I must walk bleeding, fevered, hungry, afraid? The first chief is under surveillance from the vulnerable as much as from the ambitious. At dusk, when heat releases its grip slightly, the group eats little. There's not enough gathered yet, and the water, though life-saving, still needs care. Some will dig seep pits by torchlight. Others strip bark. One pair sets simple snares for small animals. The leader moves between tasks without hovering. Presence, not interference. People calm when he nears. This is another sign that authority has moved from challenge into atmosphere. Atmosphere is a kind of power difficult to see until lost. In a well-led small group, tensions do not disappear. They simply remain below the level at which they cripple function. In a badly led group, every small problem becomes an invitation to fracture. The same number of hungry mouths, the same weak water, the same thorn trees, the same night. Different atmosphere, different future. A dispute breaks out over the best place for the seep pits. Two men talk over each other, rising. Not violence yet, but close to it. One wants near the roots where the soil is cooler. Another wants lower, where he claims water sits closer to the surface. Both partly want something else, too, to be seen as right. Scarcity turns technical questions into status contests with terrifying speed. The leader steps in only when the voice is sharpened beyond a certain line. Again, timing. Intervene too early, and adults feel managed like children. Intervene too late, and the heat of the argument becomes its own engine. He crouches, touches both spots, says almost nothing. Then he marks two places, one near roots, one lower, and splits labor. Not because compromise is noble in the abstract, because the cost of parallel testing is lower than the cost of one man humiliated publicly in failing light. This is one of the first intellectual victories of leadership over dominance. Do not settle every conflict by winning. Sometimes settle it by widening the frame so two bodies can keep face while reality decides. When water appears first in the lower pit after an hour's digging, the man who argued for it glances sideways, triumphant. The leader lets him have that look. Another choice, small, invisible to later historians, decisive to lived group life. Let competence feed pride if pride stays attached to useful truth. The first chief governs status, the way skilled hands govern fire. Too little control and it dies. Too much and it smothers. Night thickens. Hyenas laugh far off. The infant wakes and sleeps again. The group eats bitter roots, one skinny lizard, half a clutch of eggs taken from brush. Not enough, but enough to sustain another day's work. And at the fire, under the first stars, leadership changes from logistical to symbolic. This is where the role deepens. Not only the one who chose west, the one whose body now anchors the group's sense that tomorrow exists. Humans need this with savage intensity. We need one face, one posture, one voice, or one remembered sequence onto which to project continuity when conditions are unstable. The first chief may have been the first human onto whom a group loaded not just trust in technique, but trust that the group itself would remain a group tomorrow. That is almost sacred, long before religion formalizes it, because order, when fragile, feels holy. The next morning brings meat, not much. A small antelope, thin from season, found tangled in brush after panicked flight during the night. One of the scouts spots vultures low and moving wrong, and the leader sends the younger hunter with two others to circle the site before hyenas can claim it fully. They return cut and sweating, carrying what remains. Blood changes everything. Nothing stabilizes a fragile human group faster than protein in the middle of uncertainty. Nothing destabilizes it faster either, if distribution fails. This is another arena where leadership first became more than coordination of movement. The sharing of meat. Among early humans, large food items create a political problem every time they appear. Tubers can be dug and eaten in smaller units. Berries can be hidden, stolen, consumed quietly. But meat, especially from a medium or large animal, appears in a visible mass. Everyone knows it exists. Everyone knows roughly how much. Everyone knows who risked to get it and who did not. This makes meat distribution one of the oldest theaters of justice, resentment, reciprocity, and authority. The younger hunter helped bring it in. He wants the best cuts. The old man wants marrow because his teeth cannot manage much else. The pregnant woman needs dense food more than most. The mother with the infant needs it too. The adolescents need enough to keep growing. The group as a whole needs to see whether the central figure will turn necessity into fairness or into favor. Fairness itself is not simple. Equal shares can be foolish if bodies have unequal needs and tasks. Unequal shares can be wise and still look like bias. Thus, leadership enters the impossible territory that will haunt it forever. Allocating scarce goods under conditions where no distribution satisfies everyone, and every choice becomes memory. He begins with the liver. Again, not arbitrary, nutrient-dense, quick to spoil, prized. He gives the first piece to the pregnant woman. No ceremony, no speech, just the act. Then to the mother with milk drying from the heat. Then smaller portions to the children. The broad younger hunter's face hardens for one heartbeat. Then he masters it. He knows why. More importantly, the group knows that he knows why. This is leadership shifting from strength towards social foresight. A purely dominance-driven male might seize prestige food first to dramatize rank. But in a species where children require years, where pregnant women embody the group's next generation, where infant survival is a collective investment, such dramatization can become maladaptive. The first successful chief likely understood, whether explicitly or through inherited social instinct, that power must sometimes feed dependency before it feeds vanity. The older man gets marrow later, cracked open by the adolescent boy under the old woman's supervision. The younger hunter receives shoulder meat, plenty enough to save face and reflect his contribution. The leader takes a lower portion and eats without display. Not self-denial as ideology, calibration. This is crucial. Much later traditions will romanticize the first leader either as tyrant or as saint. Both are distortions. Human groups, especially small ones, usually do not elevate saints. Saints are often too passive, too self-erasing, too impractical. Nor can they survive long under pure tyrants, when escape, coalition, or ambush are possible. The first durable chief likely sat in the narrow channel between selfishness that destroys trust and selflessness that destroys authority. Enough taking to remain central. Enough giving to remain followed. That is politics in embryo. After the meal, the younger hunter challenges him, not openly to fight, something subtler, and therefore more dangerous. He retells the hunt with himself at the center. The antelope becomes, in his mouth and gesture, almost his antelope. His eyes track the others for confirmation. He laughs harder than needed at one point. The adolescents lean toward him. The old man ignores him. The women do not. They register the attempt instantly because women in small groups often become expert readers of male status theater. Their bodies and children depend on forecasting its consequences. This is the first propaganda. Not a lie exactly, though exaggeration is already near it. A bid to reshape collective memory through story. The first chief must contend not only with force and hunger, but with narrative. Who did what? Who saved whom? Whose judgment led here? Who deserves centrality? Human power is never merely material once language becomes flexible enough to bend memory. That is why leadership becomes inseparable from story almost immediately. A man can contribute one kill, one route, one correct call. But what stays in the group's distributed mind depends on how events are retold, by whom, and in what emotional weather. The leader lets the younger hunter speak nearly to the end. Then he adds one thing, not contradiction, context. He mentions the scout who saw the vultures first. He mentions the woman who kept the fire alive on the march. He mentions the adolescent who ran water to the returning hunters. He mentions, almost casually, that the antelope would never have been there for the taking if the group had stayed at the poisoned spring. This is masterful politics before politics has a name. Reframe the story so the rival's contribution remains visible. But the group remembers the larger architecture that made contribution possible. The first chief is partly a keeper of causal scale. Without such keeping, small groups rot into cycles of theatrical individualism where the loudest recent act obscures the deeper sequence that enabled survival. Human societies thousands of generations later still suffer from this constantly. The visible strike eclipses the supply line. The last speaker eclipses the quiet planner. The man holding meat eclipses the one who found water. Leadership of a high order restores proportion. The younger hunter laughs again, but now less freely. The others understood. The story was not taken from him. It was placed back inside the group. That is one way chiefs outlive champions. Champions own moments. Chiefs own sequence. By afternoon, a different problem emerges. Another set of tracks appears near the northern edge of the trees. Human. 3, perhaps 4 individuals. Not the same as the group's own. Fresh enough to matter. Old enough to be uncertain in direction. The older woman sees them first because leadership of detection does not always belong to the central male figure. She calls him over. They study the impressions together. Here again, authority is collaborative. He trusts her eyes because they have been right before. The first strangers may be near. And with them comes a new demand on leadership. Predators are one kind of danger. Drought another. The presence of other humans is worse because humans are adaptable danger. They can watch, wait, negotiate, steal, trade, mimic peace, choose violence, smell weakness, or decide, with the same minds that make cooperation possible, that your water should be theirs. The first chief may truly become chief only in relation to outsiders. Inside the group, competence is remembered, kinship softens some tensions, and faces are familiar. Outside, the line must harden. Decisions become quicker, signals clearer, risk calculations harsher. Who stands where at dusk? Who sleeps lightly? Whether fire is hidden or enlarged, whether scouts are sent, whether the children are kept close, whether food smell is reduced. These are leadership tests of a different order. He doubles the night watch without announcement. He moves sleeping bodies subtly, placing the older adolescents nearer the center, the strong adults at the edges, the children and pregnant woman deepest in the trees. He tells no story about protection. He just shifts the geometry. This is another ancient leadership skill, shaping safety through arrangement rather than reassurance. Reassurance without arrangement is fraud. Arrangement without speech still calms. The younger hunter notices he is given the northern watch, an honor, and a leash. If he is ambitious, let ambition face outward for a night. This is sophisticated even by later standards. Transform a rival into a visible shield, where his pride and the group's survival align. The first chief survives not only by crushing potential challengers, but by making them useful, before they become enemies. That night, nobody sleeps fully. This is another thing later myths forget. The origin of power is not clean. It is weary. It stinks of sweat, smoke, stale blood, damp hide, infant urine, bad teeth, infected cuts, menstrual iron, and old ash. It is interrupted every 20 minutes by sound, by fear, by the need to urinate, by children turning in sleep, by a nightjar calling wrong, by the remembered possibility of strangers just beyond the trees. The leader sleeps in fragments. That too matters. People who imagine the first chief as a body seated above others in permanent dignity misunderstand the metabolic reality of small group authority. Authority is exhausting because centrality exposes one to more information, more vigilance, more responsibility for consequences, and more resentment. To lead is to have fewer full nights. This may be as old as leadership itself. He wakes once to the younger hunter's silhouette against starlight, still at his post. Good. Or perhaps only good for now. Trust and threat are often housed in the same body. The leader knows this and does not waste time wishing it otherwise. Human beings are not built to become pure instruments. Pride, gratitude, resentment, dependence, admiration, and the fantasy of replacing the central figure can coexist in a single chest. The first chief who failed to understand this probably died with a stone in the dark or found half the group absent one dawn. At first light, he sends 2 scouts north to verify the tracks. Not the younger hunter. Again, a choice. The rival remains useful near camp where his eyes are visible. The scouts are older, quieter, known to return with fact rather than interpretation. This distinction is another thing leadership must learn. Some people bring back what is there. Others bring back what flatters their courage. The difference can kill a group. The scouts return at noon. Another group passed. Not last night. Perhaps at dusk yesterday, moving east. No immediate sign they stayed. No sign of many children. Maybe 6 adults. Maybe more, if the tracks were mixed by hoof. This information changes the atmosphere more than the practical facts alone justify, because the presence of others always does. Humans are intensely responsive to nearby humans for reasons deeper than simple competition. Another group means comparison. Are they stronger, hungrier, better armed, sick, desperate, more numerous? Will they return? Do they remember this water? Have they seen us? Did they smell our fire? The uncertainty multiplies. Leadership under animal threat is different from leadership under human uncertainty. Animals have patterns one can learn. Humans learn yours back. This reciprocity creates an older politics than agriculture. He calls the strongest adults together by the seep pits. No formal council, but close. The old woman comes. The older limping man comes. The younger hunter comes. So does one of the mothers, the one whose brother was killed seasons ago in an encounter near a carcass, stripped by another band. She has standing in this discussion because pain creates standing long before law does. They do not speak much. Early language may already be rich enough for more than we used to assume, but even rich language in small groups under danger is economical. Everyone knows most background already. The function of gathering is not to explain the world from nothing, but to align on action. Move again. Stay hidden. Show ourselves if they return. Leave signs, set ambush, avoid. Each option has cost. Move again and the pregnant woman may break. Stay and another group may contest the water once they discover it still holds. Show ourselves and peaceful exchange becomes possible, but so does fast appraisal of weakness. Avoid, and maybe they take the water later by default. Ambush may solve nothing and start a blood memory. The first chief must make decisions in a world where every path opens future consequences no body can fully see. Here is where later fantasies of natural leadership collapse hardest. There is no perfect answer waiting to be perceived by the strongest or noblest soul. There is only limited information, conflicting priorities, unequal risks, and the necessity of commitment. Leadership begins when indecision becomes more dangerous than error. He chooses to stay for 2 days, no more. Enough for bodies to recover water, for children to eat, for tools to be repaired, for the pregnant woman to regain some strength. Not long enough to become rooted or predictable, a compromise between fragility and exposure. This is another hallmark of good early leadership. Temporary decisions. Not pretending permanence, where only intervals are possible. Much human suffering later will come from leaders mistaking provisional stability for final control. The first chief cannot afford that illusion. The world is too direct in its punishments. So he chooses 2 days and ties the choice not to pride, but to conditions. If tracks return fresher, if the water falls more, if scouts see smoke north, they move earlier. Conditional leadership. Flexible authority. These are sophisticated traits. He also orders, by gesture and blunt words, that no child wander, no large fire be built after dusk, and no meat scraps be left where smell carries. Again, the first chief's work is often not grand inspiration, but rule setting around thresholds of risk. Small rules keep groups alive. A species that can obey conditional small rules under shared expectation acquires enormous adaptive power. This may be one of the hidden revolutions of leadership. the extension of behavior control into moments when immediate personal preference says otherwise. Do not light a comforting fire. Do not let the child play farther. Do not eat everything now. Do not shout. Humans become governable first at this scale. The younger hunter does not like staying. This is obvious from the way he sharpens his point with tiny bursts of waste force. He wants action. He wants the clarity of confrontation or movement because some temperaments experience uncertainty as humiliation. Better to risk visible danger than live inside invisible tension. Such men can be useful in raids and disastrous in settlements. The first chief must know the difference. At dusk, when shadows lengthen and sound travels strangely, the younger hunter says what he has been building toward all day. Maybe the other group is weak. Maybe they are fewer. Maybe taking them before they know this place fully would solve the future problem. There it is. The first expansionist argument. Not born from empire. From the practical temptation to resolve uncertainty with preemptive violence. This temptation is probably as old as sustained human cooperation. Once a group can coordinate around one leader's judgment, it can be turned outward not only for defense, but for aggressive simplification. Kill now, secure later. The first chief who refuses such temptation shapes one lineage. The one who accepts it shapes another. He refuses, not with morality of universal peace, with arithmetic of risk, injuries, unknown numbers, children here, pregnant woman here. Water still uncertain, no certainty of victory worth the cost. The younger man looks away, angry enough to imagine a different leader. Every system of power carries within it the dream of simpler, harsher alternatives. Follow the one who strikes first. Follow the one who takes. Follow the one who does not hesitate. Such figures have always had appeal because fear makes decisiveness intoxicating. But if human societies had followed only such men, they would have burned through themselves long before cities. The first durable chief may have been the one who learned to say no, not only to others, but to the addictive clarity of violent options. That kind of restraint is civilizational long before civilization. On the second day, the old man dies. Not from battle, not from snakebite, not from some dramatic rupture fit for later story. He simply does not wake fully after dawn. His breath turns thin, pauses, resumes, pauses longer. The hip that healed wrong years ago had already made him slower. The dry season, the march, the poor food, old infections never completely resolved. A body worn by decades of walking, carrying, hunger, cold, parasites, old fractures, nights of little sleep, all of this has been accumulating its invisible account. Now the account closes. Death inside a small group changes leadership immediately. Not only because one life is gone, because death alters memory balance. The old man knew places the others had not seen. He remembered faces from other groups, paths near old floods, the behavior of animals before storms. He also remembered insults, debts, failed hunts, births, deaths, and the exact way one woman's first child had nearly bled her empty years ago. With him dies a portion of the group's long memory. That is one reason the first chief cannot be merely strongest or most aggressive. The chief stands at the edge between generations. He must convert older memory into younger continuity before death takes it. The old man's death, therefore, becomes political in the oldest sense. Who speaks for what he knew now? Who inherits standing from proximity to him? Who remembers his stories accurately? Who uses his death to increase influence? Who grieves openly, and who watches others grieve? All these processes begin instantly, whether anyone names them or not. The leader kneels by the body with the old woman beside him. Their familiarity in the act reveals another truth. The central male authority and the older female memory holder have likely worked in tandem for years. Perhaps not always harmoniously, but each knows the other's place in group structure. She verifies what his face already knows. Gone. There is no time for a full burial in the elaborate sense possible in safer ground. The group is still exposed. Other humans may return, water remains uncertain. Yet the dead cannot simply be left as carrion within the trees. Here leadership touches ritual again. Power and death meet early and often. The first chief must decide not only where the living go, but what the group owes the dead under danger. This is one of the oldest measures of authority, treatment of the helpless when they no longer offer utility. Some systems abandon quickly. Others carry too long and risk more deaths. He chooses a grave near the stones above the seep, shallow but protected. The old man's broken hip had made him peripheral in practical labor, but not in memory. The leader gives him a place that marks him as one of the group's own without turning the burial into a suicidal delay. Again, calibration. The younger hunter wants to leave him, not because he lacks all feeling, but because youth often experiences the dead first as drag on the living. He says something harsh about hyenas taking what is left of everyone eventually. The old woman turns on him with a look so complete in its disgust that even he falls silent. Here, authority flashes from another source. The chief does not need to rebuke first, because the moral field of the group is not his alone. This is important. The first chief does not create values from nothing. He operates within values already distributed across kin, age, gender, memory, and fear. A leader strong enough to ignore that field becomes tyrant briefly and corpse soon after. They bury the old man quickly. The leader chooses who digs, who watches, who keeps children back, who scouts while the burial happens. The choreography of duty under grief, another ancient mark of power. The body is laid with one old tool beside him, worn smooth where his hand held it for years. The leader himself places it there. Not sentimentality, recognition. He is telling the group, and perhaps himself, that memory matters enough to cost a little time even now. This costs him politically too. Every symbolic gesture reallocates value. To honor the old man is to elevate memory holders. It is to say the group is more than immediate muscle. The younger hunter hears that message perfectly. A challenge later becomes more likely. The chief knows this and buries the old man anyway. Some leadership decisions strengthen legitimacy in one dimension while sharpening opposition in another. There is no escape from trade-off once power exists. That evening, the old woman speaks longer than anyone else has for many nights. Not formal eulogy, something older and rougher. She recounts how the dead man found dry roots in a year when children's bellies had swelled from hunger. She recounts the time he broke a hyena's leg with a thrown stone when it lunged toward a sleeping child. She recounts how he laughed after a river crossing when everyone else thought a pack would take them at dusk. The group listens because death turns stories into inheritance. The chief says little. Again, important. Not every central figure should dominate every ritual moment. A good leader knows when legitimacy grows through restraint. Let the one whose bond to the dead is strongest define the memory. He protects the space and the sequence. She fills it. The younger hunter listens too, though impatiently. He is learning something whether he wants to or not. Authority is not only over bodies now, over the dead, over memory, over whose life will still structure the living after breath is gone. Any ambitious man who wants the center must understand he is competing not just for present obedience, but for future remembrance. This is one path by which chiefs become ancestors. A leader repeatedly associated with right decisions, fair distribution, burial duty, restraint under fear, and continuity after death begins entering the group's imagination differently from ordinary adults. Not a god. Not yet anything like later sacral kingship, but more than one body among others. A hinge, a stabilizer, someone whose loss would feel like the loss of order itself. That is dangerous, because once groups begin loading order onto one figure, the temptation grows to treat that figure as semi-exceptional, and the figure may begin to believe it too. Many later catastrophes begin there. But in the early phase, before formal institutions, some loading of order onto one body may have been adaptive. Fragile groups need focal points. The problem comes later, when focal points harden into entitlement. For now, the chief sits by the grave until dark and says nothing. Others notice. Of course they do. Everything central is watched. The younger hunter watches longest. There's admiration there, and hatred, and perhaps buried beneath both, understanding. To lead is to carry the dead, too. On the morning of the third day, smoke appears north of the trees. Thin, far, human. No one mistakes it for brush fire. Brush fire moves differently. Its smoke spreads in a rough wall, low and widening. This is a vertical thread, steady, controlled. Another group, perhaps the same, perhaps not, but enough. They leave within the hour. The choice is clean now. That is almost a relief. Human beings often suffer more under ambiguous threat than under confirmed danger. Confirmed danger simplifies. Now there is no argument for staying. Even the younger hunter does not contest it, though he grins in a way that says he feels partially vindicated. The leader lets him keep the grin. No point stripping a man of the little pride that makes him carry his load fast. Again west, but angling south of west to avoid likely contact lines. This decision is not obvious to everyone. Water lies west. Why bend south? Because the chief is thinking not only of destination, but of approach vector. Another subtlety. If strangers know of the seep and might follow old tracks, one does not leave a line that predicts too easily the next resting place. Leadership here becomes concealment geometry. The first chief may already be practicing something like operational security, though the phrase will not exist for 200,000 years. The line moves faster now because fear has simplified descent. Yet simplification is itself dangerous. Panic can create speed without order. He keeps the pace below the breaking point, repeating by gesture the same old human truth. Urgency is not the same as haste. Many leaders fail because they confuse the emotional energy of a group with usable capacity. Fear can make bodies start quickly and fail catastrophically later. Good chiefs read endurance, not merely willingness. By midday, the land narrows into broken gullies. Bad ground for a group with children. Good ground for concealment. Also good for ambush. He sends the younger hunter ahead. A test, a reward, a risk, all at once. This is high-level leadership in primordial form. Use the ambitious man where his need for distinction aligns with the need for speed, but never alone enough that his judgment becomes fate. Another quiet adult goes with him, one whose loyalty is not in question and whose feet make less noise. Two bodies ahead, one fire and one break. The chief is building a command pair. Again, a very old structure. The younger hunter loves it. His body says so before his face does. He straightens slightly, becomes more exact in movement. Responsibility is intoxicating in a different way from rebellion. This is one path by which rivals are converted into lieutenants. Not all can be. Some hunger too purely for replacement. But many human challengers want not chaos, only a recognized share of centrality. Wise leaders feed that selectively. This is the oldest personnel strategy. Give dangerous talent a sphere before it becomes a knife in camp. The scouts return near evening with news of a dry overhang ahead and spoor of small game. No human tracks fresh. Good enough. The chief nods once, and the younger hunter, flushed from success, speaks before the other scout can finish. This is another lesson offered by real command structure. Success does not cure vanity. It often feeds it. The chief hears the interruption, lets it pass publicly, and later gives the quieter scout first choice of roasted meat when a hare is caught. Reward can be silent too. Groups learn faster from distribution than from lectures. The overhang shelters only partially, but enough to cut wind and hide firelight from a distance if the flames stay low. The children are exhausted beyond noise. The pregnant woman bleeds a little after squatting to rest and says nothing until one of the other women sees it dark on her thigh. Then everything narrows around her. This is a leadership crisis of another kind. No enemy, no route choice, no rival. A body at the edge between reproduction and death. The chief cannot solve this directly. He does not know obstetrics. He cannot stop blood by will. He steps back while the old woman and two other women take charge. That withdrawal is wisdom, not absence. A lesser man might intrude because centrality has become addictive. But there are domains where authority destroys competence if it enters wrongly. The first chief must know where not to stand. He orders the camp quieter, children farther, fire lower, and sends for water and specific leaves the old woman names by gesture and half word. He becomes the logistics of another's skill. This, too, is leadership. Supporting expertise rather than pretending to embody it. The bleeding slows. Not enough to remove fear, but enough that the woman breathes more evenly. The child inside may live. Or not. No one knows. But the immediate catastrophe recedes. The chief then does something subtle and important. He sits where she can see him. Not close enough to crowd the women, close enough to be visible. Presence, again, as regulation. Humans under distress often calm not only from direct care, but from the visible posture of a central stable figure. If he were pacing wildly, shouting, or looking broken, the whole camp would take that shape. Instead, he sits still, alert, contained. He cannot heal. He can hold atmosphere. This may be one of the deepest functions of leadership and one of the least celebrated. Not genius, not heroics, nervous system containment for others. The younger hunter watches him do this. Perhaps for the first time, he sees that command is not made only of decisive movement and successful scouting. It is also made of staying when there is nothing to conquer. The camp survives the night. By dawn, the woman still lives, and the bleeding has nearly stopped. The old woman, hollow-eyed and angry with fatigue, says the group cannot march hard today. A younger version of the chief might have contested this. Distance matters. Smoke north still matters. But by now, he understands the hierarchy of risk better. A group that outruns the limits of pregnant flesh loses more than time. It loses future children, social cohesion, and the trust of every female body that sees how command treats reproductive danger. This, too, is politics older than states. How power handles women's bodily risk tells women whether power serves the group or merely itself. He calls a half-day of rest. The younger hunter does not argue. Something is changing, not submission, education. Rivals are not only threats, they are apprentices, shaped by repeated exposure to decisions whose logic they first hate, then tolerate, then slowly understand, though perhaps too late to admit it. The first chief may often have been making his replacement, even as he feared him. Leadership deepens most during conflict. It also deepens during peace, though in less obvious ways. By the time the group reaches the western fold of stone after 2 more days, the immediate dangers have shifted again. Water runs there in shadowed pools. Small fish, almost not worth the hand effort, flick in the clearer parts. Reeds grow thick enough for weaving. There are signs of old camp use by humans, but not recent. Game passes through. Tubers can be dug nearby. For the first time in many days, the group experiences something close to surplus. Not abundance, never that, but breathing room. Breathing room transforms politics. Under crisis, leadership is obvious because decisions cluster tightly and consequences strike fast. Under relative stability, authority becomes easier to question and harder to justify. Why follow the one who chose the route when now the water runs and routes are plentiful for a time? Why submit to pacing when children can sleep? Why not remember old slights? Why not revisit distributions of status suspended by necessity? Many leaders survive danger and fail prosperity. The younger hunter grows louder here. Predictable. His body has replenished enough that ambition can afford expression again. He wrestles with adolescence. He retells the scout successes. He jokes too sharply about how fast the group might have moved if not for old bones and women's blood. The insult hangs in air longer than he intended. One adolescent boy laughs. No woman does. The chief hears and does nothing immediately. Again timing. If he rebukes as soon as the words leave the younger man's mouth, he looks threatened by talk. If he ignores them fully, he lets contempt settle into norm. So he waits until evening meal, when everyone is present and the emotional temperature lower. Then, while dividing fish and roots, he gives the largest piece not to the younger hunter who caught the biggest fish, but to the woman whose bleeding nearly cost them all another death. No speech, just the act. Public values encoded through food. The younger hunter sees the rebuke and cannot contest it without revealing himself as exactly what the gesture suggests. A man who forgets which bodies make the future possible. This is sophisticated moral leadership before morality has formal language. Demonstrate the norm materially. Humans understand distribution faster than sermons. Later that night, the chief sits with the old woman and the adolescent boy who laughed. They repair a basket together. This too matters. Leaders who exist only in crisis become brittle. Leaders who share ordinary labor remain legible as members of the group, not merely burdens on it. The boy watches the chief's hands, scarred, precise, slower than the younger hunters but cleaner in movement. Basket repair is not glamorous. Good. The boy is learning that centrality includes maintenance, not just dramatic action. This may be one way leadership reproduces without bloodline. Not inheritance of title, inheritance of watched behavior. Children and adolescents in small groups are political observers from very early on. Their survival depends on reading who calms whom, who shares, who strikes, who returns from scouting, who women trust, who elders consult. They learn power before they learn any ideology about it. The boy who laughed today may become tomorrow's reconciler or fighter or fool, based partly on what kinds of authority he sees embodied now. A stable camp allows another crucial function of early leadership to emerge: mating tension. In small groups, pair bonds, jealousy, alliance through mating, old attachments, and sexual access create a web no less dangerous than water scarcity. The younger hunter has been circling one of the adolescent women for weeks, in the ways young men do when language is still thin but intention is not. She avoids him when it suits her, and encourages him when it suits her. Another man, older, has also noticed her. Her mother notices both. The chief notices the mother noticing. All of this sits under daily life like dry grass under heat. One evening, a quarrel breaks when the younger hunter grips the woman's wrist too hard in frustration after she laughs and turns away. Her brother lunges. Another male rises. In 2 breaths, the camp stands at the edge of blood. This is not secondary to leadership. It is central. Groups do not fracture only over water and enemies. They fracture over mating rights, humiliation, and kin defense. The chief moves fast this time. No silence, no waiting. Because sexual conflict escalates differently. It recruits kin almost instantly and can split camps for seasons. He strikes the younger hunter once in the chest with an open palm hard enough to drive him back, and then places himself between bodies before the brother can close. The old woman is already pulling the young woman away. 2 others seize the brother. Children freeze in terror, which is useful. Noise would worsen everything. Then comes the real work. Not the strike. The settlement. He forces the younger hunter to sit apart until breathing slows. Not punishment only, deceleration. He then has the brother and another elder male inspect the red marks on the woman's wrist in full view of the group. Visibility turns injury into fact. Fact constrains story manipulation later. Again, advanced politics in embryo. Then he does what matters most. He aligns with the woman publicly. He makes the younger hunter give up his evening portion and his position nearest the central fire for the night. Not exile. Not crippling humiliation. Enough visible loss to mark the act as beyond tolerated male roughness. Not enough to make the young man flee in full resentment and perhaps join another band. This balance is incredibly delicate. Too little sanction, and women see that power will not protect their bodies. Too much, and the sanctioned male becomes an existential enemy. The first chief, if human societies were to become livable at all beyond brute coercion, had to learn this balance early. That does not mean the first chiefs were proto-feminists or morally modern. Nonsense. It means even harsh groups had practical reasons to regulate male volatility around female bodies if they wanted children, cohesion, and avoidance of cyclical revenge. The young woman does not thank him. She simply sleeps closer to her mother. That is enough. Trust is measured not in words, but in where bodies choose to rest. The younger hunter stares into the dark for a long time that night. His resentment has changed texture, no longer only toward the chief as obstacle, also toward himself, though he would rather die than call it that. This, too, may be part of how leadership civilizes. Not by removing violent impulse, by making certain impulses costly enough in status and distribution that internal conflict begins inside the aggressor's own chest. The first chief helps create conscience, before conscience is fully verbalized, not abstract guilt, anticipation of social consequence under shared norms. Weeks pass. No single event makes a chief. Accumulation does. A spring chosen correctly. A rival managed without rupture. Food distributed with memory for vulnerable bodies. A burial handled under threat. Strange tracks read properly. A woman's bleeding not ignored. Sexual violence checked before kin blood spilled. Children kept alive through pacing and shade. Old knowledge honored. New talent used but contained. The groove deepens. The younger hunter still burns. But now the adolescents look to the chief first when the hyenas call too near. The women ask him nothing directly, yet alter their preparations when his body angles toward movement. The old woman still contests him in half the decisions about routes, births, and camp placement. But that contest now gives him weight rather than strips it. Authority that survives, challenge from the respected, becomes more legitimate than authority that exists only because no one dares question it. This is one of the oldest truths about real leadership. Authority strengthened by visible, bounded contradiction becomes deeper than authority preserved through total fear. The first chief, therefore, does not eliminate all dissent. He arranges its edges. This arrangement becomes most visible during a hunt. The western fold of land supports game, but game there is wary. The animals have routes through reeds and stone that require coordinated movement to exploit. A lone hunter may bring back hare. A pair may surprise something larger by luck. But to drive a small antelope or trap a pig between stone and brush requires planning. Planning requires roles. Roles require someone whose picture of the whole is trusted. The chief studies spoor with 3 others at dawn. Here again, leadership is collaborative, but central. He marks with his hand where 2 will circle. He places the younger hunter on the cutoff line, not the opener. Why? Because the younger man is fast and aggressive, good when action has already begun, less good when patience and silence must shape the first phase. Role assignment as moral and tactical reading. The younger hunter almost objects, then sees the sense of it, or sees at least that objecting would expose vanity more than wisdom. Small internal defeats like this are how rival fire is slowly either tempered into useful metal or left to crack. The hunt works, not perfectly, nothing does. The pig bursts wider than expected. One hunter slips, a thrown spear glances, and for a terrifying second, the animal turns toward the adolescent standing wrong. The chief shouts once, the younger hunter charges from the cutoff line at the exact right angle, and the pig veers into a stone lip where another spear enters behind the shoulder. Meat, risk, success. Whose success? This question follows all coordinated human action like shadow. The younger hunter could claim the final decisive movement. The chief could claim the plan. The adolescent could claim he held his ground. The man whose spear entered could claim the kill. A group that cannot narrate such events without corrosive distortion will rot. This time the chief does something different from before. He praises the younger hunter first, deliberately, in front of all. Not excessive, not flattering beyond fact. Just enough. Why? Because the younger man's courage now served the plan rather than opposed it, and leadership that never feeds subordinate excellence breeds secret sabotage. This is another mature threshold. The chief no longer needs always to keep the rival slightly hungry for recognition. Sometimes he must feed him publicly so the group sees a path other than replacement for ambitious strength. The younger hunter's whole body changes under the praise. Not submission. Belonging. For one evening at least, he is not the excluded challenger but the visible arm of group success. Lieutenancy has formed, though no word exists. This matters more than it seems. Human polities, from bands to states, survive when central power learns to convert potential rivals into invested second-line authorities. Fail at that, and every talented subordinate becomes conspiracy. Succeed, and hierarchy thickens into structure. At the meal, the chief also makes the adolescent boy who nearly froze during the pig turn stand and retell exactly where he was and what he saw. Not to shame him, to teach. The boy's fear becomes group knowledge. Stand there and you die. Listen for the shout and move sooner. Hunting memory becomes verbal and embodied instruction. Leadership transmits lessons not only by command, but by converting near disaster into future competence. Later around the fire, the old woman laughs at the chief for placing the adolescent where a pig might gut him. Everyone laughs, even the chief. This is not trivial. Laughter at the leader, if bounded, is anti-tyrannical medicine. A leader who can absorb it remains inside the human circle. One who cannot soon needs fear to protect dignity. The first chief who survives longest may often be the one who permits enough irreverence that tension drains without weakening the core of authority. There are limits, of course. Public mockery from the younger hunter at the wrong moment would mean challenge. A woman's dry remark after a successful hunt means the group still breathes. Leadership is the art of distinguishing them. The next day, rain comes briefly. Not full season, only a hard-passing storm. But everyone runs into it like animals relieved of old debt. Children shout, women lift faces, men spread hides. The chief does not stand apart. He is soaked with the rest, grinning once like a younger body. This too enters memory. Shared joy matters politically nearly as much as shared danger. A leader present only in fear becomes associated only with necessity. A leader present in relief, in laughter, in the sweetness of brief rain, becomes attached to the idea that life under his coordination is not only survivable, but still human. Power needs more than obedience. It needs emotional range around it. Night after rain, smells of wet dust and transformed roots. Frogs begin calling from shallow pools where hours earlier there was only cracked mud. The old woman says they should remain through one moon cycle if the water holds. The younger hunter surprises everyone by agreeing. He then adds a suggestion of his own. Set a secondary small camp above the reeds where smoke can be hidden if strangers return. The chief studies him, then nods. Accepted. Another threshold crossed. The rival's judgment enters planning without requiring confrontation. This is how leadership evolves from one body's authority into a thicker fabric of shared command. The first chief is becoming not only central, he is becoming generative, making other competent centers around him without losing the core. Few leaders ever learn this. Those who do alter history. The dry season breaks slowly, then all at once. Water rises in channels. Herds shift. Insects explode from the ground in numbers. Children delight in, and adults partly dread. Plants that seem dead push green through dust. The world becomes richer and more dangerous at the same time, because abundance attracts life in all forms. Other human groups will move too. Predators follow prey. Disease often rides water and warmth. The chief's work changes again. Under plenty, keeping a group together can become harder than under scarcity. Scarcity compels. Plenty seduces dispersion. Young adults want to wander farther. Pair bonds loosen and tighten. Some think of splitting off. Others think of visiting kin in a different range. The younger hunter now speaks openly about scouting south beyond the old basalt where he claims there are better stands of game. Perhaps he is right. Perhaps he also wants distance enough to imagine himself central in a smaller cluster. This is one of the oldest political turning points. Fission. The possibility that one group becomes two. Early human bands probably split and recombined often. This was not always failure. Sometimes it was adaptive. Too many mouths in one place deplete resources, mating options shrink. Old grudges harden. Splitting can release pressure. But splitting is dangerous too. One half may lose critical knowledge, critical fighters, critical child carers, or reproductive balance. A chief must judge when division is survivable and when it is disguised collapse. The younger hunter brings his suggestion at dusk. In the semi-formal way, ambitions become proposals, not challenge. Plan. 3 hunters south for 5 days. Maybe longer if game is good. Maybe return with meat. Maybe signal by smoke if they find another reliable water. The group listens. The old woman hates it immediately. Her face says so. She has seen too many men leave with confidence and return with wounds, if at all. But she does not reject first. She looks to the chief. Everyone does. Here's leadership as gate between possibility and action. He asks questions. Not many. Who goes? Who remains? What if strangers come while the strong are gone? What if game is found but too much to carry? What if the women need moving quickly? What if rain cuts the ravine? This is not obstruction. It is scenario multiplication, the mind-forcing enthusiasm to encounter consequence. The first chief thinks in branching futures. Not perfectly, no one can. But more than those around him. Enough to matter. In the end, he permits the scout hunt. With conditions. 3 nights, not 5. Smoke only from the basalt ridge at dawn, never dusk. One of the 3 must be the quieter scout, not only the younger hunter's chosen friends. And the younger hunter's sister remains with the main group. This last condition looks irrelevant. It is not. Kin tether ambition. By keeping close family in camp, the chief reduces the risk of defection disguised as scouting. Again, subtle political intelligence older than formal hostages, but built on similar logic. The younger hunter accepts. He knows what the condition means. The chief knows he knows. Neither says it. Power often rests not on what is spoken, but on what all parties understand without speech. They leave at dawn. The camp feels different without them. Quieter. Less bright with restless masculine energy. Less defended, too. The chief compensates by changing routine. Fire smaller. Water collection closer in. Children more tightly watched. He spends more time visibly at the edges. This matters because authority in absence becomes performance of confidence for those left behind. If he shows anxiety, anxiety spreads. If he pretends too much ease, he looks foolish. Again, a narrow channel. The scouts return on the 3rd night exactly as ordered. This matters almost more than the news they bring. They returned on time. Condition held. Trust deepens. Their report, good game south, signs of another old camp, little recent human sign, one hidden pool that might last if rains continue. Useful, not transformational. Enough to support future movement or secondary range, the younger hunter is elated because his judgment has borne fruit. The chief is pleased because the younger hunter obeyed time limits and returned with fact rather than fantasy. This is the moment when a rival becomes something more valuable than an enemy. A competent subordinate with real initiative. But this conversion is never complete. The younger hunter also now has his own mini-reputation. He found, he led, he returned correctly. Adolescents watch him the way they once watched only the chief. The chief sees this and understands another of leadership's oldest griefs. Every successful protege carries the seeds of future succession or fracture. To keep all talented others permanently small is impossible and corrosive. To let them grow is to invite eventual displacement. This is why leadership is often loneliest, not when surrounded by enemies, but when surrounded by rising younger allies. The old woman senses it too. She tells the chief quietly, later, while sorting wet reeds, that the young one's fire grows. The chief shrugs, but not because he disagrees. Because there are only bad and necessary truths here. One day the younger man may challenge openly, or may inherit through collective expectation, or may break off with followers. None of these outcomes can be prevented entirely. They can only be shaped. This is another reason the first chief matters historically. He is among the first humans required to think beyond his own centrality, to imagine the group after him. Succession begins as anxiety before it becomes institution. He starts teaching more obviously after that, not by speeches on authority, by involving the younger hunter in route discussions, water reading, stranger track interpretation, child pace calculation, and burial placement memory. The rival does not understand the gift fully. He experiences some of it as recognition and some as control. Both are true. The chief is at once strengthening the group and narrowing the unknown space from which a future challenger might act recklessly. This too later civilizations will rediscover again and again. The best succession training is often indistinguishable from practical inclusion. One evening, with the children asleep and frogs loud after rain, the chief tells the younger hunter about a drought years earlier when a different leader, stronger than any man now alive in the group, insisted on staying 1 week too long beside a dying spring. 4 children died before the move. The strong leader was later abandoned by half the group without direct confrontation. They simply left at first light. This story is a warning. Power can disappear not only through defeat, but through confidence maintained past evidence. The younger hunter listens harder than usual. For perhaps the first time, he hears leadership described not as prestige, but as burdened error memory. The first chief carries past failures too, even those not his own. That is part of what makes him chief. The years change him. Not suddenly. Line by line, scar by scar, decision by decision. Children grow into adolescents who remember no other central figure. The infant at the dying spring walks now, thin-legged and sharp-eyed, old enough to fetch small water skins and ask dangerous questions. The pregnant woman whose bleeding once threatened 2 lives has birthed a daughter and buried a son. The younger hunter now has a mate some nights, and none on others, and the women in camp understand exactly how much seriousness there is in each arrangement. The old woman's hands shake sometimes while cutting tough root, though her eyes remain pitilessly exact. The chief's black hair has first threads of gray at the temples. Age alters leadership's basis. Youth can command through speed and visible daring. Middle years, through judged competence. Later years, if one survives that long, through accumulated memory and the group's refusal to imagine itself easily without you. This last form is powerful and dangerous. The older chief no longer runs fastest. The younger hunter, now not so young, outruns him easily on bad ground. Others throw farther some days. But when conflicting signs appear, when water must be chosen, when strangers must be read, when a child fever does not break, when 2 women fight over dried meat hidden by one and found by another, when the dead must be carried, all eyes still bend toward him first. This is what it means for authority to become infrastructural. It no longer depends on the latest act. It lives in the group's habits of orientation. Such leadership is harder to challenge because to challenge it is to challenge not one man, but the social geometry built around him. Yet it is also more dangerous because the leader himself may mistake this ingrained centrality for personal indispensability. No human being is indispensable forever. Groups that fail to relearn this in time often break badly when death comes. The chief senses his own slowing before others mention it. He feels it in the morning knees, in how long a climb takes to stop burning the lungs, in the way a missed night's sleep now fogs one whole day of judgment. He does not fear death abstractly. The body had no luxury for abstract fear. He fears misjudgment born from slight delay in perception, a wrong read of weather, a too late move. A rival group approached from a direction the younger bodies would have caught faster. This is one of leadership's deepest terrors. Not losing status. Failing while still obeyed, he therefore begins one of the hardest acts any leader can perform, ceding pieces of power before losing the center entirely. Route scouting goes more often to the younger hunter and the quieter scout together. Food distribution remains his, but hunt planning becomes shared. Disputes among adolescents are increasingly settled by those just older than they are. The old woman handles births almost entirely without his visible involvement now, though he still shapes camp geometry around vulnerable bodies. This partial delegation is not weakness. It is succession architecture. Again, very early, very human. The group may not know it by name, but they feel the shift. The younger adults begin glancing not only to the chief, but to those he has repeatedly elevated. Authority branches outward. This is what turns personal rule into tradition. The younger hunter, who once would have seized branching as proof the center weakened, now inhabits it differently. Time has changed him too. He has carried injured children. He has buried one of his own. He has watched the chief take blame silently after a flood ruined stored roots at a camp the chief chose. He has seen that centrality means becoming the place where others leave their fear, anger, and impossible choices. Ambition remains, but it has become less pure, more tired, more respectful. This is another hidden function of leadership. to educate rivals through exposure to burden. A man who has never held the center imagines the center as privilege. A man who begins to hold parts of it understands it as load. Some still want it more fiercely after that. Some become wiser. The chief hopes the younger man belongs to the second category. There is no guarantee. No guarantee ever. A year of good rains brings visitors, not raiders, not close kin either. A neighboring group of 9 appears at the edge of the reed marsh, with open hands and careful spacing, carrying shell ornaments from far water. Exchange becomes possible. So does treachery. So does mating, alliance, disease, theft, imitation of peace. The chief enters a new phase of leadership now. Representation. Inside the group, he is coordinator. To strangers, he becomes symbol. His posture, where he stands, whether he greets first, what he offers, whether he lets the younger men crowd close, whether women remain visible or hidden deeper in camp, whether the dead are spoken of, whether water is shown freely, all of this becomes group policy made flesh. The first chief is probably the first diplomat, and diplomacy is one of the hardest uses of authority because it requires expressing strength without triggering immediate collision, openness without inviting predation, generosity without advertising softness. He handles the visitors well. Not perfectly, no one could, but well enough that shell passes for dried fish, stories pass in broken phrases and gesture. One adolescent girl from the other band stares too long at one of his own young men. Old women compare scars and pregnancy histories with the ruthless curiosity of those who know how much can be learned from bodies. The younger hunter stands near, but not central. By the chief's design, this also teaches. Not every high-intensity human interaction should be led by the most forceful body. Intergroup contact is another domain where excessive pride can kill. The chief, older now, uses measured, calm, slow gesture and visible control of his own men as signal. Civilization in seed form. That night after the visitors leave, the younger hunter says they were weak and could have been stripped of shell and fish easily. The chief replies with a question. And then, what after? This may be the oldest anti-raiding argument ever spoken in human form. What after? After theft comes memory. After memory comes return. After return comes blood debt. After blood debt comes territory poisoned for years. A chief thinks in after. A champion thinks in now. That difference may have shaped the human future more than any one weapon. Then comes famine. Because of course it does. No line of competence saves a group from the returning stupidity of weather forever. Rains fail in sequence that no one predicted. The marsh retreats to stink. Fish vanish into mud. Tubers harden bitter and small. Antelope pass farther out than children can travel. One of the visitors' shell ornaments is found months later near a dry creek, snapped and ground into dust under hooves, as if even alliance had been trampled by season. The chief is old enough now that each new crisis is felt against all previous ones. This is another hidden feature of age and power. Younger leaders experience danger vividly. Older leaders experience it comparatively. Every drought arrives carrying earlier droughts inside it. This can deepen judgment or poison it. Deepen because patterns clarify. Poison because the mind begins seeing the last disaster inside every new one. He must guard against that. The old woman is dead now. A winter cough turned to fever. Fever to silence. She was buried under stone on a ridge, facing the reeds she saved children beside for years. Her death changed the chief more than anyone says. Without her, some arguments vanish and a wider loneliness enters his authority. Those who used to stabilize him through contradiction are gone one by one. This is another danger of long leadership. The death of peers who can still look you in the face without awe. The younger hunter, now scarred and broad through the chest in a different way, has partly taken her place in opposition, but not completely. He has courage and increasing judgment. He does not have her contempt for vanity, her memory of births, her rooted authority among women. No one can replace all sources of counterweight at once. Thus the chief becomes more central just as he becomes more fragile. This is a dangerous combination. The famine forces another movement. A harder one than before because the group is larger now. More children, 2 women carrying, 1 man half-healed from a goring. More possessions, if one can call them that. More memories attached to places left behind. Mobility becomes heavier each generation of investment. This is one of the great transformations that leadership must manage long before agriculture. The more social complexity a group accumulates, the more expensive motion becomes. He chooses northeast this time, against the instincts of many. This is bold, riskier politically than west had been years ago, because northeast means moving toward ranges associated with another band in old memory. But game sign suggests forced concentration there, and a half-dry river may still cut through stone farther on. The younger man argues for south, where he once scouted. Others support both. Real division this time. This is perhaps the closest the chief has come to losing the center. Voices rise, not in panic, in genuine strategic disagreement. This is an advanced stage of human politics. Multiple plausible futures, multiple respected advocates, one decision required. At this point, charisma alone is not enough. Past accuracy still matters, but memory cuts both ways. Everyone also remembers the cost of being wrong. He does something he has never done before. He asks the younger man to lead the first day's movement. Not the final decision, the first day, a compromise. If southward signs are stronger after one day, the path remains open. If not, the group cuts northeast before deeper commitment. This is brilliant and dangerous. Brilliant because it gives the rival dignity, responsibility, and partial ownership of outcome. Dangerous because if the younger man reads it as weakness, the center may dissolve. He does not. He reads it correctly, as trust under watch. The first day south yields little. Tracks fade. The pools found years ago are black and fouled. 2 children vomit after drinking too quickly. By dusk, even those who wanted south feel the land thinning beneath them. The younger man comes to the chief before the group sleeps and says simply, "Northeast." There it is. No public humiliation. No speech of surrender. Just transfer of validated judgment. Such moments build legitimacy thicker than domination ever can. Everyone sees. The younger leader that might be has checked his own desire against land and revised. The older chief has made room for that revision without losing the final shape of direction. This is near the highest sophistication small group leadership can reach. The group turns northeast at dawn. 3 days later they find the river. Not full. Enough. Always enough, not paradise. Enough keeps humanity alive. The chief almost falls while descending the last stone shelf toward it. The younger man catches his arm before anyone else sees clearly. For a second, their eyes meet at too close a distance for theater. Old rival, new support, past challenge, future succession. All of it inside one grip. The younger man says nothing. Neither does the chief. But from then on, others begin seeing them not as opposed bodies arranged by necessity, but as a pair through which the group's continuity may pass. This is how dynastic imagination begins even before dynasties. Not bloodline necessarily. Function line. Who stands under the burden next? At the river, the chief no longer walks the perimeter alone. He cannot. The younger man does it with him, then without him. Children fetch water under the eye of adolescence, he once shouted at. Women speak first sometimes in camp placements because their knowledge of child safety, route proximity, and washing ground has become undeniable to all. What began as one man's authority has become a layered order. This is the real success of leadership. Not indefinite personal dominance, the production of durable coordination that outlives the first body central to it. Yet the chief is still there. Still the face to whom the oldest among them turn when thunder rolls wrong or when a stranger arrives with too many scars and too little eye contact. Infrastructure still has a source. The old body remains symbolic. Symbols are hard to retire. The chief feels this every morning now. The group still wants him central, even when his knees hate stone and his sleep is broken by old pain. There is love in that, and danger. One bad decision in old age can undo years. He knows it, so he speaks more directly than he once did. Rare for him, and says in front of all one evening that when the river rises full and they move to higher camp, the younger man will choose the route. Silence follows. Then acceptance, not unanimous, but real. Succession has been spoken. It is one thing to imply succession, another to survive it. Many leaders do not. Some are challenged the moment they weaken. Others cling too long and force the group into destructive ambiguity. The chief, old enough now to know vanity when it approaches him wearing dignity's skin, refuses the second trap. But refusing it is painful, because centrality has become part of his own bodily pattern too. Humans habituate not only to comfort, but to significance. To be watched for judgment over decades changes the organism. To step back feels like partial death. This may be one reason so many later rulers failed to yield. Power rewires self-perception. Even the first chief is not immune. The river rises with distant rains, not flood, but enough to redraw banks and make the higher route necessary. The younger man leads the scouting party. He returns with a path through tamarisk and broken limestone, safer for children, longer for all. The old chief might once have chosen the shorter route and trusted strength to carry the weak through. He hears the longer plan and recognizes something painful and admirable in it. The younger man has been learning not only his own instincts, but the group's actual shape. A leader has formed, not by coup, by sediment. The move succeeds. No child lost. No pregnant woman falls. One old injury is aggravated, but manageable. The new camp sits on high ground with reed cover, 2 escape lines, and a broad view east. Good work. The group settles under the younger man's arrangement and glances to the old chief for judgment. He gives it openly. Good. That one word matters. Public blessing stabilizes succession far better than private concession. Again, the oldest political truth. Legitimacy is partly transfer. Without transfer, every transition becomes a fight. With transfer, even rivals can become continuity. For a season, the group lives under a doubled center. The old chief still receives strangers first. The younger man leads most hunts and route checks. Food disputes are increasingly settled by those with domain authority. But when settlement fails, both chiefs, if one may still use the word for the old man, sit together. Children now orient partly by generation, the youngest toward the younger leader, the oldest by habit toward the elder. Women exploit this duality with practical intelligence. Ask the younger man for speed. Ask the older man for memory. Use both. This is not manipulation in the cheap sense. It is sophisticated social life. Human groups learn to distribute appeals across power nodes as soon as more than one exists. Then the younger leader makes his first serious mistake. He chooses to pursue a wounded antelope too far at dusk. Excitement, overconfidence, the old intoxicating taste of decisive action. He returns after dark with meat, yes, but also with one adolescent nearly lost in the reeds and a trail of blood scent that brings hyenas close to camp. The old chief does not humiliate him. He asks quietly how much the extra meat cost. The younger man has no answer ready. Good. The question enters him. This is another function of elder leadership even during succession. Cost accounting for the ambitious. Youth calculates gain vividly. Age remembers hidden bills. The older man still matters because of this. But the correction is gentle, almost too gentle for some. One adolescent whispers that if the old chief had made such a mistake in his prime, he would have torn another man with words. Maybe. Or maybe memory flatters certainty. In any case, correction without destruction is another mark of mature authority. He wants the younger man wiser, not smaller. The old chief's body begins failing more visibly that winter. A cough lingers. 1 foot swells after long standing. His sight at dusk is no longer what it was. He compensates by listening more. This is another feature of aging authority. Some senses decline, others sharpen because survival requires redistribution. He becomes almost unnervingly good at hearing tension in voices before conflict ignites. He settles a food dispute one night, without leaving his hide, simply by calling 2 names in the dark and assigning tomorrow's work before the argument can become a pattern. Children fear him for this in a half-loving way. How does he always know? Because age in small groups becomes a science of small deviations. One spring morning, he does not rise immediately. Not death, not yet. Just delay. Bodies around him feel the delay before they understand it. The younger leader reaches him first. Their old relationship collapses into the simplicity beneath all politics. One man holding up another so he can piss without falling. This too is leadership stripped bare. Dignity and weakness braided. From then on, the old chief no longer walks first, even in appearance. He sits more, speaks less. But when strangers arrive in late rains, women still look to him to read their eyes before anyone trades fish. Even weakened, the body central to a group's memory retains symbolic charge. This charge matters not because symbols are magical, but because groups function partly through them. To see the old chief calm is to inherit calm. To see him alarmed would be destabilizing beyond the practical facts. He knows this, so he manages not only decisions, but his own visible fear. One of the hardest tasks of power in every age. He dies in the cold season. No dramatic last speech. No transfer ritual under stars. He wakes in the night coughing blood, then less, then not at all by dawn. The younger leader is beside him when breath ends. So is the daughter of the woman he once saved in the dry march, now nearly grown. So is the old man's absence. The old woman's absence. All the dead whose memory built the order now holding around the body. The group's grief is different from the old man's burial years before. This death feels not only like loss of one person, like the death of a shape around which years arrange themselves. This is the moment chiefs become ancestors in earnest, not because of theology. Because the group has lived so long inside one body's organizing influence that its absence creates an architectural whole. The burial is careful, more careful than danger strictly permits, though the area is relatively safe. The younger leader chooses the place, but before doing so, he repeats the old chief's own logic from years ago. Protection from rainwash, view over water, stone enough to mark, not so central that daily walking tramples memory. He is burying a man. He is also reproducing a method. That is succession complete, not the face copied. The judgment, a spear point worn thin by long use, is placed beside the body. Not as treasure, as index. The daughter lays a shell there too, old and smooth, perhaps once gained in one of the exchanges the chief managed. Children are kept back, then brought close in turn. Let them see. Let them know where. Let the place become part of the map. The younger leader speaks little. He does not claim inheritance aloud. He does not need to. The group's orientation after burial settles it. When night comes and hyenas call from far bank, all eyes turn to him. And because he had years to watch burden before taking it alone, he does not smile. He merely begins the sequence. Watch, fire lower, children's center, water at first light. The first chief is gone. The office, if one can use the word, remains. That may be the true birth of leadership, not when one powerful body first directs others. When the role survives the body, what then was the first chief? Not a king. Kings require surplus, architecture, lineage machinery, symbols monopolized, and enough distance between ruler and ruled for myth to harden around office. Not a warlord. Warlords exist in episodic violence and sustain themselves through fear, loot, and continuous externalization of threat. The first human groups too small and too interdependent to survive long under pure predation from within. Not a father in the sentimental sense. Kinship mattered enormously, but small group leadership could not be only paternal extension because groups included non-kin, affines, adopted children, half-tolerated outsiders, and shifting sexual alliances. Power had to reach beyond blood. Not a saint. Saints are beloved because they stand outside ordinary competition. The first chief lived inside competition every day. He was something stranger, and perhaps more important. A convergence point, a body in which memory, risk reading, fairness under scarcity, controlled aggression, strategic restraint, ritual duty, and atmosphere regulation came together strongly enough that others repeatedly chose orientation around it. This is a subtle definition. It must be, because early human leadership was subtle. If we imagine too much grandeur, we import later states backward into prehistory. If we imagine too little, we miss how enormous the shift actually was. A species that can produce such convergence points under stress acquires new powers almost at once. It can move farther without scattering. It can preserve children and pregnant bodies through bad decisions better by reducing bad decisions. It can negotiate with strangers. It can remember routes across generations more reliably. It can regulate violent young males without always killing or exiling them. It can distribute food in ways that preserve trust. It can bury its dead without unraveling. It can hold shape. Shape is everything. Most animals have patterns. Few have shape in the human sense. Socially learned, selectively transmitted, contingent rule-bearing coordination, flexible enough to survive changing ecologies. The first chief helps produce that shape, not alone, never alone, but centrally. And because the first chief helps the group hold shape, the group in turn changes what selection favors. It begins rewarding not only brute force or immediate cunning, but social foresight, memory capacity, emotional control, and the ability to influence others without constant violence. In this way, leadership is not just a cultural outcome of human evolution. It may also feed back into it. Groups that could generate effective leaders and transmit the habits surrounding them may have outlasted groups ruled only by panic, brute dominance, or unending quarrel. Leadership, then, is one of the species' adaptive organs, though made of relation rather than flesh. It has dark branches, of course. Every human capacity does. Once a group learns to orient around one body, it can also be manipulated by that body. Once authority exists, vanity and cruelty can occupy it. Once distribution depends on central judgment, favoritism can poison kinship. Once rivals are managed rather than expelled, intrigue can begin. Once followers attach emotional continuity to a leader, grief can become cult. The first chief contains the seeds not only of order, but of despotism. The future tyrant is hidden inside the first steward. That too must be said. But origins should not be judged only by their worst descendants. Fire burns children and still mattered. Language lies and still mattered. Exchange becomes exploitation and still mattered. Ritual hardens into superstition and still mattered. Leadership becomes empire and still mattered. Human capacities are rarely innocent, yet they remain foundational. The first chief stands in that same tragic category. Necessary, dangerous, transformative, and perhaps inevitable once human groups became complex enough that no single instinct could coordinate all the pressures acting on them. Imagine one more morning, not the old chief now, the younger one who replaced him. Years later, perhaps. A child wakes before dawn beside a riverbank camp and sees him sitting by the coals, already looking east. To the child, this may seem simply what mornings are. Someone central, awake first, reading the world before the others fully enter it. The child does not know how many decisions, deaths, marches, rivalries, burials, negotiations, and shared hungers are layered under that simple posture. That is how culture works at its deepest. The most hard-won inventions become ordinary to those born inside them. The child grows up thinking groups always have such a figure. Often they do now. Because somewhere earlier in drought and movement and burial and food sharing, the role became real enough to recur. That recurrence is the true monument. No stone survives from the first chief. No inscription, no carved title, no list of victories. Only the pattern. Someone watches before dawn. Someone remembers farther back. Someone decides when the water is wrong. Someone distributes scarce meat. Someone stands between kin before blood spills. Someone reads strangers. Someone carries the old and the dead inside the same judgment used for the living. Someone is envied. Someone is obeyed. Someone is blamed when weather turns. Someone is mourned not only as person, but as order. Then someone else learns, resists, assists, rivals, understands, and takes that burden up in turn. That is leadership before history. That is the first chief. Not glorious, not clean, not crowned. A human being with less certainty than later myths will allow, more responsibility than later romantics admit, and a burden heavy enough that the role itself outlives the body. From there, the road leads far, to councils, clans, lineage elders, big men, war leaders, ritual leaders, village heads, hereditary chiefs, kings, magistrates, presidents, secretaries, tyrants, managers, officers, foremen, fathers, committee chairs, and every other arrangement humans invent to answer the same old problem. A group must move. A group must eat. A group must not tear itself apart. Who decides? The first chief was one of our earliest answers to that question. Not the last, not the best in every age, but one of the deepest. Because before cities and writing, before taxes and armies, before law and crown, our species discovered something almost as important as fire. That one body, under certain conditions, could become a temporary center strong enough to hold many other bodies together through fear and uncertainty, without reducing them all to teeth and panic. The moment that became repeatable, humanity changed. The world did not become kinder, but it became more organized. And sometimes, when organization and restraint managed to stay joined, it became more survivable. That may be enough to call the first chief one of the turning points. Not of domination, of coordination, not of glory, of burden, not of myth, of sequence. The first chief was not the strongest man in the valley. He was the one the others still watched when the spring began to fail.